Welcome to another edition of the Hail to Michigan podcast. I'm your host tonight, Matt. Ronnie is out tonight, so I'm joined by the third member of our team, Contown. How are you?
Doing good, Matt. Embracing the completely insane weather swings here in Michigan in the middle of November. We got 2 inches of snow over the weekend, and it was 60 and humid today. So everything very normal, kind of like the swings in the Michigan Penn State game. Just riding the wave.
Man, I like that transition. So during the game, it did not feel good. It did not feel the swings during the game were not comfortable. But gosh, at the end, it just almost seemed like it was that much more fulfilling because it was such a bumpy ride.
Yeah,
kind of along the way.
I was texting buddy, about during the game. Like immediately afterwards, I was like, I was never comfortable in that game, but at the same time, Michigan felt like they just were kind of a much better team. It was hard to describe how the game flow was. I mean, the weather there Saturday added to like how unpredictable the game felt, and then in the end, like the last 3 minutes, the all touchdown onwards, it kind of just felt like, oh wait, Michigan was kind of just always going to do this.
Yeah, so let's get into that a little bit. I agree with what you're saying, and I felt like outside of the first quarter, Michigan really dominated the game. Really up until the point of the strip sack where Cade was sacked.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say in control, but I felt like they were, as you said, clearly the better team. I felt like the defensive line was kind of controlling the game. They did run the ball. Penn State did run the ball relatively effectively. Better than I expected, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, I felt like, they were controlling Penn State's passing game, which I did not expect. So let's start on that side of the ball. On the defensive side, what were your thoughts of the Michigan defense overall? And let's start with their run defense.
Yeah, so I thought, you mentioned Penn State had a little more success on the ground than maybe we anticipated. It wasn't a super successful day, or certainly not an efficient day on the ground for them. They finished at about 2.6 yards per carry and just over 100 yards. But for a rushing attack that has struggled, they didn't run for 100 yards against Maryland last week, who doesn't have a particularly good run defense. That's like, if you're a Penn State fan, you probably feel good about cracking 100 yards. But, I think overall, the Michigan run defense was still fine. It was still okay. It wasn't their best game. I think the front had a really good game. Obviously, we know what Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo did, especially getting after the quarterback. But Aiden was his typical self in the run game as well. I think Massey Smith played a really good game, and I think you can kind of put him on the level of not a Hutchinson, but almost an Ojabo, kind of like a Brad Hawkins, Daxton Hill, guys you count on to just have a good game week in and week out at this point. I think he was a little up and down at the beginning of the season, and then sometime around Wisconsin and Nebraska really settled in and kind of has become just a steadily very good player in the middle of that defensive line. And then I think even the other defensive tackles, I don't think stood out to me as much as Mozzie, but all had pretty good games. Chris Hinton obviously got the most snaps next to Mozzie, but we saw a pretty extended run of Jeter and then even Julius Welshoff as well. And I think Donovan Jeter had some really nice plays in the run game. Some really quality snaps for Michigan. we kind of know what he is as a player now in his 5th year. He's not a huge asset in rushing the quarterback, but he really does not get moved in the ground game. He's very stout, and he gave Michigan some good snaps as well. I think Penn State did a little to mess with the linebackers in the run game, and they were able to get Clifford on some designed quarterback runs and escape the pocket a couple times as well. So I think he finished with about 16 yards rushing, which sacks included is a lot because he was sacked, obviously, a lot as well. So
7 times, or
yeah. So kind of a warrior like effort from Clifford, doing all he can for this offense to get 16 yards, counting 7 sacks is really good for Penn State. So it was a weird dynamic in Penn State's running game where I kind of feel like Penn State feels good about it, and then at the same time, like Michigan probably also feels fine in their performance on Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked a lot in the preview about the big plays, and I mentioned that I think it's pretty standard. The rush over 20 is what's considered the big play, and then pass. There's some debate on that, on how many yards. They had no rushes over 20 yards. Well, I think the big plays were limited pretty well. I think the point that you made about Michigan feeling good as well as Penn State feeling good. They can sit there and say, well, between the 2 running backs, we had 100 yards rushing, and okay, that's decent day. And Clifford got some on the ground, and that's a decent day. And like you said, Michigan can sit there and say, we didn't give up one run over 20 yards, give up no rushing touchdowns. The average, as you said, was very good. I felt like the defense, the run defense specifically, was pretty good. Was pretty good. And while they got, I mentioned in the preview, I said, they're going to get 50 yards. That obviously was low. But it just felt like they were going to be able to run the ball some, and they did. But when it counted or when it mattered, they really seemed to shut it down pretty well. Yeah.
So they actually had, if you take out the fake field goal, which was just a bonkers call by Franklin, but the numbers get even better for Penn State. That's 1 run for a loss of 18. So they were actually at 127 yards rushing on 41 carries, which still is only 3 yards per carry. The running backs it was efficient when they were running to the running backs, but they were never, like you said, it was never a big play. The long run on the day was an 18-yarder by Clifford. Like, I think Michigan was very content to let Penn State run for 3 yards up the middle to the running back because it meant the ball wasn't going to Jahan Dotson, and it wasn't. We had the formation and the preparation to make sure the running game never became efficient or explosive for them. So I think every time Penn State handed the ball off on first down, Michigan was happy.
Absolutely. And I think I think you mentioned a few of the backup DTs that I think, moving forward, they've found they've rotated, with Jenkins a little bit earlier in the year, and they've rotated in general, just in those 2 inside spots when they're playing the nickel. But I think they found kind of the formula, maybe, that Jeter can be the rotator and run situations, and Welshoff can come in and spell anybody if they need a break on a passing down. Morris gets in there some. Jenkins on the 3-man fronts especially will rotate in as well. I think they've got a nice blend, and all of those guys are coming back except for Jeter. So it's pretty encouraging for how gloomy the interior D line kind of looked. I'll say in the off season, definitely post last season. it's pretty encouraging for what they have moving forward inside there, both against the run and against pass. And I think that, Hinton and Mozzie next year are they're going to be some dudes because they're already pretty good right now.
Oh yeah, it's Mike McDonald has to be very happy with the situation he inherited, and then what he likely gets to roll over into year two. And we haven't even seen much of Rayshon Benny yet. So he's had, which is what you want from a true freshman interior guy, but he's a guy who's kind of waiting in the cupboard, so to speak. So it feels like we're in a really good spot at that position. And you mentioned like Mozzie and Hinton coming back. It's like, it seems like Michigan has been, everyone that we talked about preseason is having like high potential, but we need to, see what they do, see how close to that potential they come this year. It seems like Michigan is getting just great returns out of everyone in that category this year. And that should portend good things in 2022 as well.
Yeah, the kind of the running verbiage for it, I guess, is they just need birthdays, which is just it's a funny way of saying it, but what that really means is they need, some guys aren't ready right away. Some guys it takes a few years to get used to the college game, whether that's pad level, hand placement, whatever it is. And they've had some guys take a step, and I think Sean Nua, especially in this scheme, has now kind of earned his paycheck a little bit, kind of silenced the critics. I think he's proven to be a developer of talent, and the recruiting at the end of last year and in this 2022 class for the defensive line has been pretty good. So that's something exciting to look forward to. But we have a very exciting season going on right now. So let's get into the pass defense against Penn State. I think you brought it up a little bit. We're talking about Clifford in the run game, but I thought it was just you said it best, a Warriors effort by Clifford on Saturday. Get into what you saw a little bit here with Clifford and their overall pass game and Michigan's efforts to stop it.
Yeah, so I think, anytime you talk about the Penn State offense generally, especially the passing game, like all eyes are on Jahan Dotson. He's been a phenomenal player for them. They like to throw to him 20 times a game if possible. He had 11 catches for 242 yards the week before Michigan played him. Over 120 against Ohio State. He's had, I think, 4 or 5 100-yard games this year. So he's a dude. He commands a lot of focus, a lot of attention, and it's no secret who they're trying to get the ball to. So it was going to be interesting to see how Michigan approached that. And really, they kind of left him. They left DJ Turner on Jahan Dotson most of the game. Occasionally, Vincent Gray had Dotson, but it was a lot of DJ Turner in man coverage and a safety over the top. So Michigan trusted their corners to go out there and have a little safety help, but mostly handle Jahan Dotson. And it paid off. I think DJ Turner really played maybe his best game of the year. Certainly one of his better games, and then account for the competition level. And they held Dotson relatively in check compared to what he's been doing to other teams. I think he was targeted 16 times, and he came out with about 61 yards, which is just under 4 yards a target, which if you're Michigan is a massive, massive victory. Never got in the end zone and was not on the field for the final kind of fourth down play that put the nail in the coffin. So really, really big victory for Michigan as it relates to Jahan Dotson. Now, Penn State did get a couple chunks in the air, but we kind of mentioned it in the preview, like that was going to happen. I can't remember what the specific over under for Clifford's passing yards going into this game was on our episode last week, but I know we all took the over. I want to say it was like it was in the 100s, like just under 200.
Yep.
And
I was going to say that too.
Okay, yeah, because
just
we all
under
mentioned
2.
like, okay, yeah, we mentioned we were like, this is the ideal is hold Clifford like under 250 if possible. Under 200's really not going to happen. With the weapons he has in the offense, they like to run. And he did clear 200, but just barely. Ended up with 205 yards. So it was really a lot of that is affected by the pass rush as well. And they got a couple chunk plays. The biggest one to Parker Washington, who is also a very good receiver. But I mean, 205 yards on just under 5 yards an attempt for Clifford, 7 sacks, included, is a huge win for Michigan going against what is really a very good passing attack. Penn State's offense as a whole doesn't have great numbers on the year, but the passing attack is doing 90% of the lifting in most games. So really great performance by Michigan, and especially DJ Turner and the pass rush. A thing that was very interesting, and we kind of touched on this a little bit as it relates to the Indiana game, but Rod Moore started this game, and I don't necessarily think it was due to injury because Moten was in on the last play. So it'll be interesting to see if that is, going forward, if that's like a opponent style of play thing with the heavier passing attacks, or if that's just Rod Moore kind of stock on the rise type situation.
Yeah, absolutely. That we talked, in the preview about whether they'd run the Barrett package much, and he was out there. Mm-hmm. They ran some of that, but for the most part, it was like we anticipated a lot of their nickel 4-2-5 kind of look. With Moore out there and Dax in the slot and no RJ Moten. So that would be very interesting going forward. If Moten maybe ends up in the Hawkins role next year, a little closer to the line of scrimmage. I don't think we've talked before. I certainly don't think he can play the Dax role. So if Moore's kind of passed him up there's not a clear successor to Hawkins. And Moten has played, and he's had a few, he's been up and down, but he's certainly for a redshirt freshman has been pretty good. So I'd expect him to be back in the rotation next year, maybe even, this week if it was potentially maybe nagging injury related type situation. But I thought that was interesting to see. Their tight ends, I felt like they got Theo on the one that he kind of broke a couple tackles down the sideline. And then I would guess that we were the only Michigan podcast that mentioned Ty Warren by name last week. So if you thought you'd heard that name before, it was probably here. But he catches the touchdown pass. Held them relatively in check. It will be interesting to see, and I don't want to get too far down the Ohio. It just feels like everything is pointing to the Ohio State game now. But Ohio State has 2.5 Jahan Dotsons. So can we defensively? Can Michigan, limit a group of them? They did. It feels like we keep saying, "Oh, this is the test," and they pass the test. We're like, "Well, then the next test will really be the test." But all tests lead to Ohio State for sure. So I felt like this one was passed with flying colors, especially considering the expectation. Overall, defensively, I thought really good game plan. I didn't feel like there were some times where they still weren't lined up at the snap. But I didn't feel like tempo got them, certainly not as bad as Michigan State, the Michigan State game. So a couple times where they weren't completely lined up, but I didn't notice any times where Michigan was running a guy on as Penn State was snapping the ball. So improvement there.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, I felt like the defense, I mean, just in between 300 and 350 total, if I'm remembering correctly. 332, yep.
332, and almost all of, I think 145 was in the first quarter.
It was.
So I think that's it's interesting. I am not entirely sure what my general takeaways from the first quarter was. Texting during the game and getting messages that Michigan got defense getting dominated in the first quarter, and it didn't really feel like they couldn't get off the field, but part of that was due to the fake punt. There was a 3rd and 17 conversion, and I think another 3rd and 8. But at the same time, I responded to someone and said, Penn State only being up 3-0 at the end of the first quarter is really bad math for them, considering how much their offense had been on the field. So it was kind of the style of play from the defense that we've seen a lot this year, which is bend but don't break, is kind of a cliche and maybe even has some negative connotations, but it was very much like, get them into 3rd down, see how many 3rd downs they can convert on a drive when you've got the pass rush quality that Michigan has. And then in the red zone, it was, 2 field goal attempts, and the James Franklin factor means that only ends up with 3 points. So, it was kind of like the defense. It obviously Penn State had some success in that first quarter, but the defense kind of, held up, bowed up, some steel in their spines until the offense got going, and then it was kind of lights out for the Penn State offense.
Yeah, when you the whole force them to go on long drives, and they'll make eventually they'll make a mistake strategy on defense. That strategy is aided greatly when the coach is prone to make mistakes too. So that was very helpful. Just overall, he just, God, in game, he just makes some bonehead decisions. But it's neither here nor there. Let's talk about the offense a little bit. Give me your thoughts on. Let's start with the run game. That's where they seemed. We thought the biggest advantage was going into the game. That's the coaching staff seemed to agree with us. That's kind of where they attacked the most, or where it felt like they attacked the most. Give me your thoughts on the run game.
Obviously, Michigan has a very special player in Hassan Haskins. There are a lot of runs that I thought were a great deal of the yardage was made by Hassan. There's one run really stood out to me. The second play out of halftime, the 2nd and 7, and we were running a pin and pull to the right, and Hassan was hit in the backfield by the Will linebacker, blitzed right into the play, and Trevor Keegan kind of didn't get a piece of him. And a lot of backs, it would have been 3rd and 9 on a very pivotal drive. Excuse me. Any football person knows, like, if you score coming out of halftime in a relatively close game, your odds of winning go way up. And Hassan just kind of broke the tackle of a pretty good linebacker. I believe that was Ellis Brooks. He's a really good player. And then broke it outside for 12 yards, give or take. So Hassan's fantastic. He's a workhorse. There were some questions when Blake went down. It was like, can Hassan do everything? Can he pick up the parts of our rushing game that were, and even the passing game that were, more geared towards quorum? And he's done that. So really phenomenal effort by Hassan, and he gets better as the games go on. I noted on the board that there were a couple run plays where I think he really missed a cut or didn't follow the design of the play to his detriment. The first one that really stood out to me was on the second series, but this is like a twice a game occurrence, and like even those plays tend to go for positive yards. So he's fantastic, and gonna enjoy these last 3 and hopefully more games that Michigan gets with him. I thought the most interesting part of the general run game strategy was how much success Michigan had on the perimeter. The weakness of Penn State's defense, we highlighted going into the game, is the defensive tackles. I still do think that's the weakness, but it didn't seem like that was a major part of Michigan's game plan in the run game. It was a lot of pit and pulls and counters designed to hit the edges, and the last couple drives that iced the game. Most of Hassan's runs were perimeter runs or off tackle runs, and I just thought that was it was very interesting. Kudos to Michigan for believing that they could do that and sticking with it for 4 quarters, because they clearly warmed down as the game went on. Ebiketie and Lukita are both really good edge players, and Penn State has good linebackers. But at the end of the day, Michigan beat Penn State straight up on the edges in the run game. So it's pretty impressive, and I think that really should be an encouraging sign for the last 2 games here. As long as everyone's healthy and in it for the long haul here, Michigan's got a really great running game to lean on down the stretch here.
Yeah, I don't remember if I watched before we did the pod last week or if it was right after, but I went back through the Illinois highlights, Penn State Illinois highlights, to kind of see what Illinois did, because they obviously had a ton of success in the run game against Penn State. Illinois ran for over 300 yards, and I thought, well, what can we take from that? So I went and watched the highlights, and there really wasn't a ton of huge plays. It was a chopped down highlight film too, so take that for what it's worth. But I did notice a ton of pin and pull in that game, and I thought, that's really, despite what you mentioned with a weak interior, that's really a smart strategy. Pin down their best player with a relatively easy block, and playing games with their linebackers that are more athlete than, 2 of the 3 are more athlete than linebacker, and you're going to have some success doing that. And so I guess when it happened in the game on Saturday, I wasn't completely surprised with that strategy, because I had seen it work from previous teams. Ohio State killed them with some outside zone. But a lot of Ohio State's run game was they had one long Henderson run, and I want to say they went for approximately 150 yards, and the one Henderson run was 60 some yards.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of other minor stuff, really. And so I wasn't completely surprised by that. I figured we'd give them a big menu, especially given the linebackers, what I mentioned with them. Historically against Penn State, when Michigan has had success on the ground, it's been playing games with their linebackers, because they do recruit athlete. And linebacker is a very hard position to play. And I think Penn State's offense did that to Michigan a little bit too. Their offense is kind of built to make it difficult on the linebackers. So I thought Michigan did a good job. Hassan was, the majority of the carries, got majority of the workload. Would have liked to see a little bit more of Donovan, but I understand in nut crunching time that You're not going to put the freshman out there. So Hassan played great. Like you said, a few more games in the Michigan uniform, and he's going to go down as one of those guys that, in 5 years, 10 years, like, who's really good? Hassan Haskins. And during the time you don't appreciate them as much because they're the next big thing, or the next recruit comes in, and I think people are really appreciating him this year. But it sometimes those guys kind of fly under the radar. So
Yep.
Let's switch over to the pass game. Cade had some effectiveness through the air, but it was a relatively quiet day for the downfield passing. He finishes with 217 yards, with obviously the big one to all being, quarter of the yardage. So give me your take on the passing game against Penn State, who, as we previewed, their defensive backfield is just loaded with ball players.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's a result, obviously, that Michigan would consider a huge win. I don't think any of us would have predicted that every Michigan touchdown would come through the air against this secondary. But you mentioned there's a couple chunk plays. Even the Roman Wilson touchdown, I think, was 21 yards. So it technically does not count as a red zone touchdown. Although that's kind of they call it the orange zone, or, schools have different names for like inside the 30 as well. But you get a couple chunk touchdowns, the Roman Wilson touchdown, and the Eric Ald touchdown. Michigan tried to hit Penn State multiple times on like a 3-by-1 with formation with a crosser, the ISO receiver on a shallow cross, coming in underneath the 3 receivers to the strength. And so that was clearly something that we saw in their defense. It wasn't like we hit that 10 times, but I think Cornelius caught 2, and then all obviously caught the big one. I thought it was interesting that, correct me if I'm wrong, but Michigan ran a couple 2-by-2 formations with each set of wide receivers in very tight stacks and very wide splits.
Yep.
And I don't remember seeing that previously this year. I could be blanking, but I thought that was very interesting. I thought it was smart to try to pull some of those really good second level athletes that Penn State has away from the ball. The Roman Wilson touchdown, it was 2-by-2. It wasn't like a mirrored formation, but you had that kind of, I think Cornelius and Mikey were stacked to the field side, like on the numbers when the ball is like almost on the right hash. So, and then you got Roman Wilson in man coverage for the touchdown. So I thought there was some really good designs from Michigan in the passing attack this week. Cade was efficient. It was a little rocky at the very beginning, but once they settled in and were able to move the ball on the ground, kind of opened up some things for Michigan to take their shots and pick their moments in the passing game to strike. And there's some really, really well designed things. So I think it was another good game from Josh Gaddis from a play calling standpoint. He continues to have a really good season in my eyes. And Michigan made plays. When they took their shots, Michigan made more plays than Penn State's secondary did. So big win for Michigan's passing game against a really good secondary. Wasn't like a consistent beating, but like it was kind of like the whole game. Generally, like you look up at the end of the game and you say, yeah, Michigan's passing attack just was better.
Yeah, that stack formation, I noticed that in the game too. I was watching the game with my brother, and I said to him when they came out in that formation, I thought, ooh, I said, ooh, definite run, um,
Mm-hmm.
because we hadn't seen it before either. And anytime we do something kind of completely unusual, especially a formation, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the wide stack. Um, I think it's hard to pass out of that if you're not like Baylor under Art Briles that is running that all the time and you're kind of
Right.
more accustomed to running it. Michigan
Mm-hmm.
has ran the tight stack wide on one side, but I think you're right. I haven't seen it yet on 2x2 where they're both wide and stacked on top of each other like that. Um, I thought it did signal run, but I thought like you said, I thought it was um, effective, and they may have actually thrown out of it once too. So even my initial thought, like when they line up, was incorrect. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. I noticed too. And Orlovsky does. He's great, by the way. Orlovsky is great on the color commentating.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of his day-to-day opinions. I think he's overly critical, but during the color commentating, he is excellent.
Yeah.
And I thought he did a real good job of pointing out what Michigan was really trying to do was, pull that seam and hit the crosser underneath. And then a few times they mixed in. I don't know if they ran a seam inside of it, but then they had a dig from the trips or however many, if it was only doubles on that side or whatever. Usually out of trips, the 3x1s. But I don't know if that was incorporated with the inside guy kind of running the seam still, and then the middle guy running the dig, or if when they did the dig, it was the inside guy every time. I can't remember for sure.
I know on the one, I think it was all that caught the shallow crosser. But if Cade had a second more, like a half a second more, Ibikiti was closing it on him. He had beat Hayes. But Roman Wilson was running the dig on the other side from the slot. So, and he was coming open for if he gets the ball, he's probably still running. So, yeah, they did run it from the slot when I noticed it.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I thought that was, I thought they did a good job of kind of exploiting some of the weaknesses regarding their man coverage with the crossers, and then the zone with the vertical stretch and getting the one crosser underneath that kind of shallow crosser out. They did hit Haskins a few times out of the backfield too, and then one where he was actually a wide out, which it just feels like every time they utilize the running back in the passing game, it is just so enticing with like, okay, what can that be with Donovan Evans? What can that be with even Blake Corum, who had the one drop on the wheel, but overall is a pretty good pass catching running back. It's just it feels like there's a lot left there for them to kind of play around with the running backs, whether that's out in the backfield or split out. One of the things. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I thought when we were talking about Haskins earlier, I was thinking that it was almost more impressive what he did in as a receiver Saturday, just because we're almost at this point kind of accustomed to him being great on the ground, but he was a massive contributor in the receiving game. That 3rd and 13 screen they dialed up was beautiful, and he broke a couple tackles to get the first down, perfectly called into the blitz. So and he's a great check down option. I think he doesn't have the reputation of being like a natural receiver, and you maybe could even see some of that on the play you were talking about where he was split out wide. I think that was that 4th down. They kind of ran like a little. It wasn't a screen, but it was kind of like a pick route for him to run underneath.
No, it was third down, and
Third.
his
Okay.
knee hit the
Yeah.
ground short of the first down, and they
Yes.
didn't go for it on 4th and 2 or whatever. And if he would have just, if he would have caught it diving, or his knee would have hit it, after that step, it
Yep.
would have been a first down. So yeah, that was a
That's what I was
nice
thinking. I
play
was
though.
like, it was a great play, really good design, and he caught the ball back. Like that's a play where I'm almost like, does Donovan Edwards, like, just feeling maybe a little more comfortable being split out, catch that, standing
Mhm.
up. But no, I mean, Haskins was a great asset in the passing game as well, this weekend, and he's just like a really great check down option, for Cade. Uh, if he's sitting over the ball at 5 yards, he's going to get 8. If he's sitting off, to the right at the line of scrimmage, he's going to get like 4 or more. He's going to make the first guy miss like he always does. So, yeah, really impressed with Haskins as a receiver as well.
Yeah, I think sometimes the bigger backs get a bad reputation for pass catching ability or whatever, but I think he has good hands, and I think you're exactly right. That kind of check down that isn't very deep, from the line of scrimmage, but can result in a good play. There's many an NFL quarterback over the last 5 years that have made large sums of money by hitting. I who was I? I don't think it was Orlovsky, but I forget which quarterback. Maybe it was Dilfer. Probably Dilfer was talking about. He calls that taking the cheese.
Mm-hmm.
And he refers to that as a positive for the quarterback. And so many quarterbacks want to push the ball downfield at, especially young quarterbacks all the time. And the cheese is right there. They don't want you to take the cheese. The defense doesn't.
Right.
And if it's there, just take it.
Yep.
Live to fight another down. It's positive play moving forward.
Yep.
3rd and 20, you can't hit the 4-yard check down, but it can be a great play, especially on second down. Get you right to the sticks, basically. So,
Yep.
One
thing I disagreed with Orlovsky on, this is not really, it's not schematic. It's kind of just a game flow thing. The one pass interference penalty on the flea flicker, both it was McDonough is the other guy in the booth with Orlovsky, right?
Yep, Sean McDonough.
Yeah, both McDonough and Orlovsky kind of reacted like that it was a bad pass interference call because of where the ball, how far out in front of Anthony the ball landed. And like they kind of commented that it wasn't a catchable ball, but it was only not catchable because Anthony was knocked down. Like, right. Was I wrong there? Like the ball landed inbounds, like only like, I don't know, 10 yards in front of Anthony, but like it was a long ball. And if Anthony is running full stride, it was like quite catchable.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that was a definite flag too. And
so I mean, they called it. I was just like very surprised that both McDonough and Orlovsky had that reaction. I was like, am I that much of a homer? Is are the former NFL quarterback not seeing this as well? But.
Yeah. I one thing, like philosophically, I wanted to get your take on, Borges mentioned this week in his kind of breakdown of the offense. He mentioned the lack of RPOs and Michigan running into a stacked box. One of the things that we've talked about and has been mentioned before with RPOs, especially last year, that really hurt Michigan is, if your quarterback is inexperienced or inefficient, not very accurate, RPOs can actually be a detriment to the team. They can force you to throw, force the keep for the quarterback, and force you to throw. So then you're throwing, when you really should be throwing the ball 30 times a game and running 25, you're running 15 and throwing 40. And with Michigan's passing game, especially last year. I don't think that was the formula they really wanted. But overall, what are your thoughts on the kind of the balance? Obviously everyone would prefer to see a read option every now and then. Makes the run game a little bit easier, and so do RPOs. But what's your overall opinion on the aggressiveness of the play calling, the balance, the run pass balance, and kind of the philosophy of this team? I don't think it's necessarily Gaddis's preferred way of calling plays, but what's your take on that?
So I think you touched on a really important point in terms of kind of how I view this team, and I assume it's similar to how the coaches are looking at it. When you call an RPO, it's the O is what kind of categorizes that play call, right? It's an option, so you don't actually know what the outcome of your play call is going to be when you send it in. And I think with this team, the strengths are the running backs. You like your offensive line, and you're relatively young at even the quarterback position. Cade is still has not played a full season of football. He's starting, I think this weekend was his 11th start. So he's a smaller guy in stature. We've seen plenty of balls hit off offensive linemen or get batted down this year. And you've had high turnover at the receiver position as well. You've had, obviously, Bell goes down in the first game. Roman Wilson's wrist injury. You've got a newer starter or a guy who's playing starter minutes for the first time in Angelo Anthony. So you kind of get, less experience and, less sure of the outcome as you move away from the run game with this offense, and as you move to the outside. And if you're calling options, depending on what the defense does, and you don't know this pre-snap all the time, you could get into an outcome that you don't want, or you could have more reps. Like Borges, you mentioned, Borges talked about, you could have ended up throwing like 40 to 50 times against Penn State based on how the defense played if we were calling RPOs more frequently. And that's not really what you want when you know the strength of this team, and especially in this particular matchup when you know the weakness of Penn State. So I think if you take more RPOs out of it, you're getting the ball into the, you're calling your run game, you're calling the ball, or you're calling the offense to gear towards what is a strength. And then you can call your shots in the passing game through play action. There's often confusion among fans and even sometimes among broadcasters, whether you're calling whether a play they just saw was an RPO or a play action. A lot of the play action game can function in the same way the RPO does, in that it can hold, kind of act as a control on the linebackers coming downhill, a control on the safeties. But the outcome. So it's more concrete for your guys who are more inexperienced on the outside, and in Cade, who, you don't want to put a ton on. He gets the moniker of, game manager, but, in reality, that can be a good thing. So I overall, I like how Michigan's calling this based on their personnel. I like how Michigan called the game against Penn State, where they kind of get better as you get away from the ball. Their linebackers are, better than their defensive tackles. Their secondary is the strength of their defense and maybe the whole team. The RPOs, I think, for this team in 2021, the RPOs are just too much of a unknown on play to play based on the personnel. And then generally, we know the strength of this team is running the ball, and running the ball can be a 4-quarter game. It's not always going to be, you're not going to pave every team, especially the good teams, the ranked opponents on the road, that your top 20 SP plus teams. It's not going to start off as a paving. So that's a 4-quarter game to run the ball. and you got to stick with it if you want that to be your identity and the strength of the offense. So I really have no problem with how the offense is being called right now. It's not the flashiest at times, but I think it has become a little splashier as the season's gone on. We saw the splash plays this weekend, and overall, I tend to agree with how they're managing the pass run dichotomy of the offense right now.
I think all of that was very well said. I agree with all of it. I think they could be a little bit better in the play action. You mentioned that being a good thing that they have done well, and another way to control. I think that's the better way to control for them with this team. I think one other thing two other things to consider. You mentioned the run game being the strength of the team, and while that is true, but I think it's deeper than that. I think the two running backs are your best players.
Mm-hmm.
So why would you, if you're thinking about it from the defensive side, and you're a guy being optioned in RPO, why would you take Mike Sanderstill when the alternative is stopping or getting the ball out of our two best players' hands? Of course, they're going to force Cade to hit Mike Sanderstill or someone. No offense to Mike Sanderstill, but Blake Corum and Hassan Haskins are better players than him. Yep. So you're putting that up to chance a little bit more. And my other first point being you want to get whether your best player is receiver. If it was a wide receiver, we'd be talking about we'd want to force feed them 12 targets a game. When your best players are your running backs, taking the ball out of their hands doesn't seem like a good strategy to me. Not that the RPO guarantees it out of their hands, but it chances it. My second point being is, you're looking when you're building your offense or your overall game strategy. It's not just about the offense. The defense is young. New scheme was not very good last year. So all those things considered, the 4-quarter game, that you mentioned, the running the ball, keeping the defense rested off the field, things like that, I could hear the counter argument now. Well, if they throw the ball more and they score more, then the defense can give up more. And okay, and that is certainly a way to win. But with this team and all things considered, inexperienced quarterback, very talented running backs, good run blocking offensive line, and the defense coming off of last season, I think this was the best philosophy for the team as a whole. Do I think this is their preferred method? No, I think they love to be. Okay, let me take that back. I think being ground and pound can be certainly a method that they prefer, but I think everyone would love to put up 60 points a game and go as fast as possible, and kind of go that route and do all kinds of RPOs and be the Kansas City Chiefs out there. But at the same time, these are college players that are pretty much across the board pretty young. I mean, they will return approximately 15 starters next year. So when you take all things into account, all the things that you said, when you take the running backs being the most talented, and when you take helping out your defense by controlling the clock, limiting opposing possessions, I think it's been fine too. I think it's been an adjustment for the offensive staff, and I think they've done a good job, especially being with a lot of moving parts on the offensive staff. So McDonald has turned the defense around in short order, and Gaddis has had a pretty good year himself. So, I mean, more games than not, we've come back and said, yeah, I really liked what, the game that Gaddis called. So let's switch over briefly and talk about the Maryland game this weekend.
Can I
I
just
think
say
for
one last thing on Penn State?
yeah,
Just super quick. I like. I don't know if this has been our MO, but kind of just to play narrative police a little bit. Like, don't let any Michigan fan or otherwise tell you that this wasn't a big win. Penn State is top 15 in SP Plus. They were ranked in, I believe, both the AP and the coaches poll. I know they were ranked in the AP poll.
yep.
They are a top 10 defense. They're actually, SP Plus has them at 6th, right behind Michigan. Happy Valley remains one of the hardest places to win in college football. And this is a team that is, I believe, directly behind Michigan, one place behind Michigan in the 24/7 talent composite. So I know Penn State has had their struggles this year, and there's plenty of people who after the game, wanted to say that this doesn't count as a big win or Michigan should have won this game. But a lot of those people would have also have said that this is a big game that we lost had we lost. So give Michigan credit, Michigan fans especially, give Jim Harbaugh and this team credit for a big win. This Michigan team has beaten now 2 top 15 teams on the road this year in Wisconsin and Penn State. If you go by SP Plus or various other advanced metrics, into super hostile environments that Michigan doesn't, at least in recent history, win a ton of games in. So don't let anyone kind of rig the narrative against this team. They're doing all the things that people have said that Michigan doesn't do. So really good win for the coaching staff and for the team.
Absolutely agree. Harbaugh said it best. How about them Wolverines? All right, let's switch over to Maryland. I think we discussed a little bit off air, at least from a fan's perspective. I know we're not supposed to look ahead. We're fans. Who cares? A lot of our focus and discussion has been on Ohio State. Maryland. Actually, we go to Maryland. I was going to say Maryland comes down. We go to Maryland. Right now, if I remember correctly, 21-point spread. Oh, no, 15. 15. I was getting that a little bit confused with Ohio State and Michigan State. But 15-point spread on the road against Maryland. Let's briefly talk both sides of the ball here. Let's start with their offense, probably the strength of their team. What are your thoughts on Maryland's offense this weekend?
So Maryland has a pretty good offense. They're obviously quarterbacked by Tua's little brother, Talia Tagovailoa. He's a good quarterback. He's a little too, I guess, gunslinger would be, a cliche you could apply to him. He'll try to force some things. He puts up big numbers. He's only thrown for less than 250 twice this year. The one was the disastrous game they had against Iowa, where he threw 5 interceptions, and the other was their loss to Minnesota. Even the Ohio State defense, he threw for 279 yards. The Penn State secondary that we've been raving about, he threw for 370. So it's an offense that wants to throw the ball early and often. They throw a ton on first down. They're actually a little inverted in their tendencies in that they are 70% of the time going to throw the ball on first down, and it evens out as they get into later downs. But Maryland is a team that has pretty good talent. The constant talking point every time Maryland job comes open or the coach gets on the hot seat is it's it's a sleeping giant. Whoever can recruit the DMV, there's so much talent there, and put a unified product on the field with that talent is going to make Maryland great. And they've never quite put it all together, but they do have talent. Their receivers are a talented group led by Raheem Jarrett, who was a 5-star. He was at one point committed to LSU. He's from DC, I believe, and flipped late in the cycle and decided to stay home with Maryland. Very good player. They lost their other great receiver at Demas for the season in that Iowa game. And they've just recently, I think they've actually lost 2 of their other leading receivers. They lost Marcus Fleming for the year against Michigan State, and Jashawn Jones is also out for the year with a leg injury. So it's kind of a typical Maryland team, more or less, in that they started off really strong. They've been hit by the injury bug, and in conference play, they're just not quite on the level of some other conference opponents, especially in the East. So they've kind of faded down the stretch, but the offense is still pretty potent. It's a top 40 offense to SP plus, and they're going to try to throw for 350, 400 yards and really spread the defense out. They get the running backs involved in the passing game a lot as well, and they have a good tight end in Okonkwo. So it's another test for the defense. They want to go fast. I think maybe even faster than Penn State goes. I expect them to score. I don't expect Michigan to have hold them to 200 total yards or less like they did Indiana. But it's a team that Michigan should still eventually put away. An offense, I should say, that Michigan's defense should eventually put away. And obviously, with throwing so much, that's going to give Hutch and Ojabo opportunities to add to those sack totals.
Yeah, that was one of the points I was going to bring up. Their tackles have struggled a bit, I think would be put it nicely. I remember from watching the Iowa game, the Iowa's defensive line just really controlled the game. Their left tackle, Jalen Duncan, was on the radar for quite a few big schools. I want to say Ohio State even offered him. And their right tackle was also a higher end recruit, Johari Branch. I might be saying that wrong. But he's their right guard. The right tackle is I've never heard of him. They're back to Duncan though. Duncan is good-ish, but the rest of their line is spotty, and I think that's going to be, as always. I feel like I'm saying this every week, and probably next week will be the only week I can't say it. But this should really be a game again where Hutchinson and Ojabo can really control the pass game up front, and with their with the receivers that being down, the amount of receivers they have being down. Jarrett's still a big concern, but with the amount of receivers that they receiver injury that they've dealt with, I think Michigan should be able to hang on in the pass game. Run game is just a kind of a mix of guys to me. They've got Penny Boone, who plays some off the bench. Fleet Davis is the starter, I believe, since their starter got hurt. Overall, the run game is just okay. I think Michigan should be okay there. Like you said, they're going to score, if by nothing else, tempo. But overall, defensively, I think I'd compare them to Penn State light. They're the lower end of the conference version of Penn State. Really good skill players, decent quarterback, bad O-line. And if that happens against Michigan, it's this current Michigan team. It's not going to be pretty for their pass game. But I think overall they should score. Let's switch over to their defense. I've got to admit, against this Maryland defense outside of Nick Cross, I don't hardly know many of their players, let alone their skills. And I know that you have done a little bit more research on them than I have. So take it away.
That's not fair because a little is very generous. The margin I'm sure is very slim. The defense is certainly the weakest part of this outfit. They, in trying to do my research on Maryland's defense, it's been hard to really pinpoint the weakness. Which phase of the game they're weaker. I want to say that it's the secondary, but at the same time, Minnesota ran for 326 yards on this team, and Minnesota has a good rushing offense, but it seems like this defense kind of finds a different way to give up points every week. Michigan State was fairly balanced against this defense last week. Kenneth Walker had a good game, but they didn't hit 200 yards on the ground and were under 4.5 yards per carry. But they also threw for 287 yards. So it's just a unit that doesn't do anything great, really. They have a couple guys who can get after the passer a little bit along the front. But one thing that stands out to me about the defense is the top two tacklers are defensive backs, and the fourth highest tackler on the team is also a defensive back. So that's never a good sign. It means either teams find your secondary to be, or your pass defense to be really bad and are trying to attack through the air, or backs are getting to the second level with regularity. So they're 90th in the country on the year in terms of yards per play, given up at 5.8 yards per play, and that number, if you control just for the last 3 games, actually goes up to a flat 6, which is puts them on par about with Rutgers, although Rutgers has been better in the last 3, so they're maybe even trending down a little bit. It seems like an outfit that Michigan should be able to run on and to lean on a little bit, but I also think there's going to be opportunities in the passing game, especially if you go the running route through the play action game as well. So it's the defense that has really not allowed them to stay in games in conference play here. With the only win they've had in conference coming against Indiana. They actually beat Illinois early in the year as well. So they had a weird kind of, they played a conference game before their last out of conference game. So, but
that was close too, wasn't it? Like 20 to 17, 14?
Yep. 20 to 17. Yep. So, like early Illinois too. So, but they're 1-5 in their last 6 in conference. It's it almost feels like I'm being too mean, but it kind of feels difficult to find anything they do particularly well on defense. They've got holes in all levels, and it shows.
Yeah, I was looking through their schedule, and it's just weird. Yeah, The Iowa game was over basically when it started. Same with Ohio State. Minnesota ran all over them. Penn State was probably closer than the final score indicated. But then they had a close one with Illinois. So, yeah. Seems like we play Maryland late in the season often, and that seems to be a good thing. I don't think they're all that deep of a team. I don't think they have been. They play. I noticed that they've got the Robinson kid that I think a lot of people were recruiting him as an edge, but he's playing like a Sam linebacker for him, and he's starting as a true freshman.
Yeah.
Nick Cross. Yep, Nick Cross played early in his career. The receivers always play right away. So I still don't think they have a extremely talented roster. And I love your point about the defensive backs. Like, unless you're TCU, if your safeties are leading in tackles, it's not good.
Yeah. The two safeties are, it's Mosley and Cross are the two leading tacklers, and I think Mosley is a pretty good player. I know Pro Football Focus likes him, so maybe you might call him out as kind of the star of this defense, and certainly as the leading tackler, he's forced to be. They have an edge player who, I mean, I'm gonna do my best on the last name here. It's Sam Okuya Nonu. Okuye Nonu. I'm sure I butchered that. But he's kind of like a Mike Dana build. He's like 6'2", 280 is his listed weight. So he's a thick dude, but also a pretty good player, at least against the run. So, I mean, they've got a couple pieces, but like you said, they're still just not a talented enough roster or even big enough roster to be competitive down the stretch defensively in this conference.
Yep. They're playing Hypolite is the other linebacker. They played last year some too. Anyway, you said you got some prize picks, some over-unders. Did you find some of those?
Yes. Yep. Got our prize picks. Proud sponsor for the podcast. So we'll run through a couple over unders here. First up, we'll go with the passing game. Michigan's quarterback, Cade McNamara, over under 194.5 passing yards.
I'll go over. I think typically when they play kind of lower end of the conference, they tend to kind of go in a little bit of a shell and be run heavy and just survive. But I do think they'll want to keep the passing game kind of rolling a little bit, especially for what's coming. And I think Maryland will score enough to where, probably early too, where keeps it more competitive. So I'll say over.
I agree. I'm going to go over as well. The last time a quarterback has not thrown for at least 200 yards against Maryland was the Minnesota game, because Minnesota ran for 320 yards. So even the freshman for Indiana, McCauley, threw for 242. Last week Clifford 2 weeks ago Clifford and this past weekend Peyton Thorne, both averaged around, between them averaged about 320 yards. So I'll go over, and for the reasons you said as well. Should be a good day for Cade statistically. Let's stay at the quarterback position with Maryland, and go to Italia's stat line here. Over under 249.5 yards for Tagovailoa.
Push. I think he's going to be over 200. I'll say under, but just slightly, like 240. Kind of seems like the mark there. So I'll say under, but just barely.
I think I'm going to go over. I think we'll keep him under 300. But I look at Penn State's got a good. I think it'll be by volume. I don't think they're going to have success on the ground, and even if they're just, even in garbage time, maybe trying to get some more points on the board. I think he'll get over the 250 mark. Michigan State's not known for a great secondary, but he had 350 against them this past weekend, 370 against Penn State's secondary that we think is pretty good. Even Ohio State, he had over 270. So I'll go over. I don't think it's like a great day, but I think he'll be between 250 and 300. And let's wrap up on the ground. Let's go with Hassan. Does he have another big day? Prize Picks has his over under at 92.5 yards on the ground. What do you think, Matt? Over under?
Over. He's getting at least 100.
Yeah, I agree. Should be, I would think, fairly similar in terms of volume as the last 2 weeks, and I think Maryland's run defense is more Indiana than Penn State. Actually, I don't know. I don't think they're. I don't know which is the better run defense actually of those two teams.
They're not very good.
Yeah, he'll do well. So over 100, another 100-yard game at least for Hassan.
All right. Is that all the over-unders?
Yeah, I think we got one more. Prize Picks has one more in the receiving yardage game for Michigan here. Cornelius Johnson, they've got him at 50.5. He had a couple big plays against Penn State, even though he didn't get into the end zone. So how about against Maryland? What do you think? Over under 50.5 yards for receiving for Cornelius.
This is a Cornelius Stan pod. We've been saying for majority of the season that he is a stud, and I believe that still. So over.
I will go over as well. Maryland has been pretty porous. Usually at least one receiver on your team gets going against Maryland. It's a secondary. I don't think he's going to have a Jahan Dotson game, but he's averaging 16.7 yards per catch this year. So 3 catches, if my math is worth anything, should get him just to that mark. I think he'll slide over as well. I agree. This is a Cornelius Johnson podcast.
Absolutely.
As well as the Leon Franklin podcast. Shout out Leon Franklin. I think Leon will get a carry in this game. I think that's actually something to watch is what running backs get touches aside from Hassan. Obviously, we think Corum won't make the trip. But Edwards only got 2 touches against Penn State, and I almost wondered if he was maybe not quite 100% still. So I actually think it'll be interesting to see who spells this on and how much this week.
Yeah, they do have, I believe, 2 games of wiggle room left with Dunlap. I think he's only played in 2, so could be him as well. But yeah, I agree. I don't want Hassan getting 35 carries the week before Ohio State, especially if the game's in control.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Could be a big Donovan game if he is healthy. So,
yep.
All right, let's get to game prediction then. We'll start with you.
So Maryland does have a good offense. I think they'll get a little bit. They'll put some points on the scoreboard. Ultimately, I think Michigan's strength in the run game and the ability to they'll go play action and make enough plays in the passing game. I think Michigan will start to pull away in the middle and kind of, fourth quarter. I don't think it'll be in doubt at all. Maryland is averaging 20 points a game in Big Ten play, which is obviously not great. Penn State held them to 14. Ohio State held them to 17. And I think Michigan does pull away, especially with the success of the run game and kind of wear the defense down that way. So I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go Michigan 38-17. I almost want to go bigger. I think Jim plays Maryland really well. It's kind of the week before Ohio State thing that's holding me up a little. But this is you mentioned we tend to play Maryland like in the back half of the season and when they're kind of already limping a little bit, and Michigan tends to have the ability to wear them down. So I'll say 38-17, but I could actually see it being even larger than that, depending on how it goes.
Yeah, that was the exact score I had. So I will go 42-21, just for. I do think they'll score a few times, maybe even get a garbage time, get them to 21. I don't know that Michigan will score 42, but yeah, just for the sake of being different, we'll do 42, 42-21.
I was debating between 38-17 and 42-20. So
hey, there we go.
In lockstep here. I will say after this past weekend, I am 0 for 2 when I predict Michigan to lose. So perhaps good news for 2 Saturdays from now.
10 days away. I'm already nervous about it. Got Thanksgiving filled with Buckeyes to get through. So I'm already dreading that conversation just over a week from today. So as always, appreciate the insight. We look forward to this game, and we're definitely already thinking about the next week too. So get through Maryland, get a win, and on to the big one. So as always, for Contown, this is Matt. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Hail to Michigan podcast, and go Blue.